Walter Heath, and I'm a resident of Morro Bay, and I'm also currently serving on the board of the Morro Bay Chamber of Commerce and on the board of the Central Coast Maritime Museum Association, and I'm the president of Morro Bay and Bloom. I'm very pleased to be joining the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Measure Q Oversight Committee. Lots of important fiscal matters to discuss these days, and I'm looking forward to having my city, email address, and so that you folks can be in touch with me with your questions and comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Walter. Dawn, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dawn Addis, and excited to be here as a new committee member, and looking forward to the work that this committee has to do with supporting the city and moving forward. And equally as excited as Walter about the email address, and looking forward to your contacts.
Thank you. I'll open it up for public comment. Members of the audience wishing to address the committee on any business matters may do so at this time. Please come forward, state your name.
Hi, my name is Carol Truesdale. I'm a resident in Morro Bay since 1995, and I want to compliment your committee for putting this document out. It is easy. It may not have all the numbers we need as we scratch our heads, but it was a wonderful job, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate that, and we're not done. We got more to do there. Thank you, Carol. Please come forward.
Good afternoon, Citizen Finance Commission. My name is Rigmor, resident of Morro Bay, and welcome to Dawn and Walter. I want to let you know how much I appreciate you doing this work for us. My 2 cents worth opinion today is first that I think we should do a Measure J and to go for a 1% increase instead of 0.5%. I doubt that many of us really checks how much sales tax is on our items we're buying. In Norway, the VAT tax is 25%, and I, for one, had really never given it much thought until I actually looked at it when I was there this summer. And since Norway is the happiest place in the world, maybe to increase sales tax is a good thing. Second, to reduce our expenditure, I wonder if there might not be some bloating in our city government, and that some employees could be reduced down. Although I know that will take some gutsiness. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else for public comment? I will close public comment. That brings us to the consent calendar. Item A1, approval of minutes for the January 21st regular Citizens Oversight Finance Advisory Committee meeting. These were included in your agendas. Is there any corrections or updates to those minutes? Questions, comments, please? Go ahead, John.
Yes, I had some questions which, when I took a look at what we talked before. Craig, are we going to have a brief status of Measure Q expenditures at the meeting, since that's half of what we're supposed to be doing anyway?
Thank you, Craig Smolinger. Are you talking an update of Measure Q expenditures as of now? Yeah,
I mean, is it an easy thing to do, or is it difficult for you to find out where the expenditure of the funds are?
If you remember our mid-year report when we went on that, the expenditures were actually really low compared to the 50% expended expenditures, horrible statement. But now as you see some more black asphalt being placed on the pavement, some of that still needs some patchwork, things like that has been noted out in the community. You would expect those expenditures to rise up quite a bit recently.
Oh, no.
So what I'm getting at is
just an idea
the
of
expenditures are probably at a pretty low line and are spiking right now. And we expect to expend about $1 million out of Measure Q. So it kind of depends on when you pull, those expenditure reports. If we did it in a week, it'd likely be quite a bit higher.
Would it be, well, I guess the thought was, would it be possible to give is it difficult to pull that information for a meeting, or do you have to go to a lot of spaces to identify it?
Excuse me, I thought we went over all that at our December meeting, the expenditures. I think it was till December or November 30th on this fiscal year. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, and one of the questions which was in there was, is there like a way to have a status of the Measure Q funding? Not a detail, all the little things, just like top line number.
If the committee requested a simple information item like that, maybe at the next CFAC meeting, we could certainly provide that. It would have probably a lot of asterisks on it.
I'm just we have allocated this much money, we've spent this much.
Sure.
Go on with life. The next one was the $55,000 allocated or reallocated to this year yet, or is it still?
You'll see that on March 28th. Okay. So we had to go forward with a budget amendment to move that forward. So that'll be part of a comprehensive item, including moving the WRF budget out of the 599 fund over to the 321. We're kind of rolling all that into one agenda item to make it easy.
So maybe the suggestion would be at the meeting where we go over the third quarter budget reports year to date, we can include a summary line item for Measure Q.
Assuming we do that with the third quarter.
Okay, all right, if we have that data. All right, thank you. Go ahead, John, I'm sorry.
And then there were three other questions which were in the middle of that minutes. One was staff coordination for expenditure of Measure Q funds. And I'm still not, when I read that, it didn't quite make sense to what that was about. Is there a plan for an IT system presentation this year? And the last one was the work plan, mission goals, and objectives, but I assume that we're going to have that discussion today.
Okay, so yes, the work plan we're going to have today. The IT is on hold with a couple other presentations. We still have one opening on our committee. I would like to do this with a full membership, and we need to prioritize that. And what was your third question?
No, that covered it.
Okay, so I think we're good.
Good.
And any other corrections or updates to the minutes? And Craig, you answered the $55,000 that will be reallocated with a budget adjustment. Remember, that was just a recommendation. Council had to approve that, and then staff has to do the paperwork to process that.
Absolutely correct. But I did see council when you presented during the mid-year, they're all nodding like this. So I'd be shocked if they didn't allocate it.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we need a motion to approve the minutes as submitted. I'll move.
I motion that the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee accept the meeting minutes from the March 21st, 2017 meeting as written in the agenda for tonight's meeting.
All right, thank you,
without
Dave.
change.
And I second.
And, okay, thank you.
You mean January 21st, right? You said March.
Oh, I'm sorry, January 31st.
Let me correct that. January 31st, 2017 meeting. Today is actually March 21st.
So Mr. Baton has moved. Mr. Irwin has seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so moved. Thank you. All right, so number 2 on the consent calendar, accept into the record a benchmarking study completed in 2016 by former CFAC member Marlis McPherson, now on the City Council, and also in the audience. Welcome. Are there any questions on that or comments or discussion? We've previously discussed it, I believe, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment. A lot of work. I mean, something like this boils down to something that looks unbelievably simple, but to get into it and to try to make sense out of this is very, very difficult, and I commend Marlis on a wonderful job. Two things I'd like to point out in there. One's controversial, one's not. But in her attempt to try to say, okay, what can we glean from this, at least my reading of what's there, is in item number 4, where it was indicated the greatest difference found was the way fire, emergency service, and police service is provided. This is the one that's obviously very contentious when it was brought up before, but probably along the way we should not lose sight of this, is that we're an outlier relative to how do we provide this type of service. Granted, it would cause another meeting that would fill this hall if we got back to it. However, we're finding out with the CalPERS issue that something has to be done. The other part of this had to do with legal services, where it seemed like most of the other cities that we looked at had their own city attorney, and one of the issues that I think we were going to look at was consultants, which, since that's a consulting service. But those are two opportunities, one of which would be applauded probably by the community to look into. The other, obviously, we would fill the auditorium again. But it's something that I think some tough decisions at some point have to be made, and it's something to look at. The alternative that I heard discussed relative to the police service was the sheriff's department. Now, maybe that's our only opportunity. The other people who do this, as was indicated in the report, do it by, like Pismo. They do it with the 5 cities organization. None of the other ones needed a sheriff. Now, we might have to do that as our alternative. But just want to point out that it was an excellent study, but there were a few items in there that were pointed out that would have the possibility of addressing our budget issues.
Any other comments from anybody else? Go ahead, Dave.
I wanted to thank Marlis for putting the report together. I think it's very clear and a lot of good information in here, and I think it really points out the difficulty of trying to benchmark against other communities, considering the differences in government organization, demographics, and local economy. It's very difficult to draw conclusions by comparing Morro Bay with other communities, given the different types of services that are provided by the community and the budget situation with the different communities. So that was one of the lessons I got out of this, is the benchmarking is not an easy thing to do. And if you're going to benchmark against other communities, we have to really figure out what elements we're going to benchmark against to come to any kind of a reasonable conclusion or get information, a reasonable amount of information from that. So again, thank you, Marlis.
And I'd echo those concerns. Very well stated, Dave. I believe that's why I asked Craig to include it in the minutes so that we could have a record of it. I think we may very well need to come back to some of this information further along when we get into maybe some discussion on budget cutting. So,
yeah, and I would say I have some ideas, but it wouldn't be appropriate at this point of how we might kind of simplify a look at budgets at other cities. So we dump everything into some sort of category so we have a rough idea of what we're dealing with, and also something to help compare budgets between cities.
Thank you. Okay, so motion to accept this report, receive and file.
I move we accept into the record the benchmarking study completed in 2016 by former CFAC member Marlis McPherson.
Thank you, Walter.
Second.
Seconded by Dave. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. All right. Thank you. That brings us to the business items today. Item B1. Discussion and input on fiscal year 2017-18 CFAC work plan. Each year, we, as a committee, pretty much decide what we want to, or not decide, but based on direction from council, we try to articulate what we want to work on during the next year. So Craig and I have included that in our agenda. And I thought I would open it up for discussion for the members to think about what we might want to work on. And then also, I would ask all of the members, we will typically establish some subcommittees to work on these projects. So you maybe want to be thinking about, what subcommittee you'd like to join. For instance, for example, Dave Batant, Marlis McPherson and myself worked on the subcommittee on the budget-friendly document reports that we did last year, which was probably our biggest project, quite honestly. So we're not finished with that. We've made a very good start, but we'll be doing some more. Somebody will be doing some more work on that. So I'll open it up for discussion. It's in your agenda package, item B1, on page 12 of 16. And Craig, this is similar to what this is last year's, correct?
Current year.
I mean, current year, yes.
Correct.
Okay.
So if I can jump in real quick, please. Barbara, just to kind of give an idea of why the second attachment was included beyond the current work plan. It's the draft City Council goals and objectives that will hopefully be adopted by the council after a workshop in the near future. So the idea is to have each advisory body have a work plan that builds directly into that council strategic plan. So we're working to achieve some of those goals. So obviously, draft goal number 1, titled Achieve Economic and Fiscal Sustainability, seems kind of right up our wheelhouse. So good place to start.
Okay. Perfect, right, because we did have a discussion on the goals, extensive discussion in our January meeting. So, all right, so basically goal number 1, ensure fiscal and economic sustainability. How would the question for us is, what do we want to do to help the council and the city support that goal?
I had a question.
Yeah.
The attachment to the agenda, this one that says Citizens Oversight Finance Advisory Committee Work Program, is the work program for the current fiscal year? Because I had a different document. This may be outdated.
That's what I thought it was last year. Yeah.
It's dated September 28th, 2015. Is that one for the prior fiscal year?
Craig, if you look at the review, the dates are 2/15 to 2/16, the objectives starting.
It looks like some of those do span over a couple fiscal years. If you look down at Goal 5, Objective C, CFAC review, that carries forward to quarter 4 of the current fiscal year, which would carry us through June of 2017. Similar circumstance for Objective E, budget policies, that kind of span over. So without being present to see the 15-16 to 16-17, I would guess some of those were carried forward. And likely someone didn't update the date range on a couple of them.
Okay.
But kind of on that note, if I can use that as an in, obviously one of our goals or objectives should be making sure you review the Measure Q tax every December.
Yeah, that's not on here.
It's a requirement, so just want to note that. Also, as Barbara mentioned, the budget transparency likely will be enduring through a little bit of next year as well. CFAC review obviously would be important as we go forward, at least on a mid-year and end-of-year basis via the audit or another mechanism. And budget policies are something you'll hear as we present the audit on the 28th as well, as something we need to work towards. So just some food for thought if you're thinking of ideas, just something to think about.
Okay, so maybe I'll start off with one goal ought to be to review the Measure Q expenditures and revenues and expenditures for the next fiscal year. That review is typically done, it's actually for this fiscal year, but it must be done by December 2017 per statute, and then reported back to City Council typically January, February of 2018. So that is one goal that we must accomplish. So is that enough detail for that, Craig? And that maps back to city goal number 1, achieve economic fiscal sustainability, if they want it mapped to something.
No, I think that's great. And hopefully my idea is I can compile all of your collective comments once you kind of have consensus on where you're going. I can shoot that back to Barbara, so hopefully you're all comfortable with where that's going. The original intent, as you know, when I shot each of you out an email, I think it's before Walter and Don were here, was the City Council planned to have some joint sessions between all members of each advisory body and the City Council. So just to give you a heads up, that's changed a little bit. Most likely it's going to be the City Council and the chair for each body going forward. So.
Okay, so is that still scheduled for April?
I believe tentatively.
Okay. Okay.
They'll be sending out those dates hopefully shortly.
All right, so in a way, we're doing a little bit of this backwards because we should have direction from council, right, before
Yes.
we, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
But in the Measure Q presentation that I did for the last fiscal year, and we discussed at our last meeting, I did include some things we thought we might want to work on, just as a suggestion. And those were, more of the Measure Q, budget transparency, maybe a street funding initiative, something along those lines. So that was the presentation that was done February 14th. So I think we can still go through this and put some ideas to paper. And then if the council says, hey, you have 6 goals there and 4 of them are great and 2 of them we don't want you to do, but instead do something else, we'll go with the flow. They give us the direction, so, okay. So the first goal, unequivocally, review of Measure Q for this fiscal year, completed by December 31st, and presented to council with recommendations. Okay, so the second one, then I'll start, and then maybe you guys, kind of chip in with what you think. I would like to see us continue to work on the budget transparency. I think what we've done is well, let me ask you, Craig, what kind of feedback have you gotten? I think you were going to look, number one, thank you for putting it under the hot topics so people can find it easily. And I think you were talking about maybe measuring how many hits we're getting or how many people are even looking at it. So, obviously, some in the audience have.
Certainly, and if I can give just a brief update, I've probably heard from 8 or so people, either verbally like we just heard or through a couple of emails I've received, all positive.
Okay.
They all love it. The current budget we produce is a lot of numbers in black and white, and that doesn't really relay what's happening, where the money's coming in from, or what it's being expended on. So one thing, great job. Looks great. The second one, we did try and go forward and find the unique IP addresses that were hitting that news flash so we can see how many people are actually hitting it versus how many are actually responding. Unfortunately, we can't get that data. It'll show how many click on the hot topics as a whole, but not the individual page. So I'll keep digging on the IT end, but I've been told about 3 times because I keep pushing them. If we can get a little more detailed information, that'd be great. My limited IT capacity thinks we should be able to get that. It's a unique URL. I don't know why we can't get it, but I'll keep pushing. But all indications are very positive.
And when we eventually get the IT presentation, we will ask that question. But understood, that's fine. At least people are getting back to you with comments, so that's positive. So anyways, as a goal, it would relate to the same goal, Goal 1, fiscal sustainability, improve budget transparency, and by that I mean we would establish a subcommittee, we would take what we have done that has been positively received, and maybe see how we can expand it for some of the enterprise funds or what else people would like to, as during our citizens outreach, other things that people have asked, citizens have requested. And if we have enough members that we can do a subcommittee, we can have a subcommittee meet. They can, as I understand, Craig, they can invite members of the public to sit in on any of those meetings. And so we have some other citizens that are interested. They can come attend and give us some feedback. So I think that might be a good way to get some outreach. Comments or thoughts? Agreement or disagreement?
I agree with it, but part of budget transparency for me is the budget policies and having something that city staff can understand and provide them a structure where they can report their budget process so the city can, the staff has to understand, the citizens have to understand. And from my conversations with you, Craig, it looks like it's still a work in progress to train the staff up to understand what they're dealing with.
I'm not sure I totally follow where you're coming from. If I can address one portion of that. We as staff, even though we're new and I'm including myself in that, have a pretty good handle on the budget. We've got a good idea of where money's coming in and from, and I would hope all of you would have confidence in that. But fully up to speed, certainly not. It takes us a little longer to get through processes, but we're still getting through the processes. But I'm not sure I follow your questions.
Is there an established process for city staff to follow when preparing and recommending budgets?
Each year we are required to have an adopted budget by June 30th. So that's kind of the high level kind of process or timeline that we do follow. From there, we do have an internal process that's sent out via budget memo that myself and the city manager, Dave Buckingham, will send out with expectations from departments. That hopefully will follow any direction or instruction that we receive from city council, such as budget cuts or things like that we recently received. I was going to get to at a later agenda item, I believe is B3, B2 could be. But we do have a process we go through.
I would love to see the memo which the city Mr. Cunningham sends out to staff just to see, understand the process that you're working with.
Okay, I guess I could see if we can send that out.
Let me help here.
I'm not really sure how to.
Yeah,
I want to answer your question.
Clear on. Dave, did you have a comment?
Not yet.
Okay. They do have a process, and they have a budget, and I think they do extensive community outreach and workshops. And it's not a simple memo that goes out to from what I've seen, that goes out to the employees saying, hey, do the budget. There's a process, and it's been audited by auditors. And so I'm really not clear, John, what you're asking.
Maybe when the audit is presented, I'll have a chance to see if it's discussed within the audit. But I'm just wanted to understand processes that the city employees follow when they're working with the finance.
Sure. As Barbara mentioned, we do go through an audit process every year to make sure we are going through processes like you're describing. I think conceptually how the process plays out, maybe this will kind of get us on to the next subject and answer your questions. We would go forward with any kind of projections if we are following that Government Finance Officers Association's best practice to do that, a 10-year kind of snapshot, which we just presented to the council. Mm-hmm. From there, that'll give us a better idea of expected revenues and projections down the line, so we can make those little course corrections now versus potentially having something as drastic as a layoff or a program cut down the line. We can be more strategic in our approach versus a draconian just cut. So from there, we gather our forecasted revenues and expenditures given current kind of trend lines where we're going, including, CalPERS cost is the big one now. So what I do as finance director is make sure that when CalPERS brings in their projections, that's roped into assumed cost of living increases, step increases for all employees when they go from step 1 to 2 or things like that you'd expect. And from there, we push out what those numbers look like with instructions, again, following both the projection and city council direction if you need to cut, where to cut from, hopefully. Or in better budgeting times, if you've got a little extra money, it'd go into a strategic investment account, which has happened a few years ago. I'm not sure who was involved in looking at that. From there, there's expectations that are sent out via instructions that I mentioned from city manager. Finance director will be coordinated with that. And then it's an internal process of vetting and making sure those expenditures are actually needed. It meets the need of the public, the expectations for the revenue stream, whatever it is. And if we have to go through cuts, then it's kind of a systematic approach to what's needed and what could potentially be cut. That's presented to City Council generally during a workshop, potentially 2, and then City Council will hopefully adopt that with some changes needed prior to that June 30 deadline. So hopefully that answers your question on kind of process.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that helps a lot.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, so go ahead, Dave.
I just wanted to clarify, in my mind, we're talking about the budget transparency part of what we're going to be tasked with. So this fiscal year, we came up with the budget summary document. Mm-hmm. And I presume we're going to need to update that for next fiscal year to reflect next fiscal year's budget numbers. and looking at this work plan, present ideas to the budget subcommittee would research and present ideas to the CFAC on innovative budget presentations. Are we going to go beyond that document? Are we going to consider other, maybe making some comments on the budget document itself?
Absolutely. I think because the budget document, we want to make that more transparent. So I would think we'd have an open-ended scope to look at, or the subcommittee to look at anything that makes the budget easier for the common citizen, unschooled perhaps in municipal finance, to understand.
Are there any other budget presentations or any other form of budget presentations that we would be wanting to look at or work on?
I think that would be for the committee to come up with. I'm open.
Okay. Well, that might be a question that we need to talk about. There probably are some recommendations we could make on the budget document. One thing I can think of off the top is maybe including accomplishments and objectives in each separate department page in that budget. The city manager has a budget letter, but then there's also pages that show the budget for each individual department. And that was one idea I had, and I've seen this in other budgets for other cities, to include adding accomplishments and objectives for the current fiscal year that the departments will be asked to meet. So that's one example that might make it more accessible to the average individual looking at it.
It's a great idea. We actually did that for when I was with the city of San Diego and the city of Carlsbad. You put your accomplishments on there and the goals for the next year, kind of what kind of targets you're trying to hit. You know, we're trying to spend $1 million in Measure Q money this year to do street paving would be a great one, and improve the pavement condition index or whatever you're doing. One thing I would hope you guys would look at, I know this was kind of a tough subject or a tough area to put your thumb on, was transfers. So interfund and intra-fund transfers and how those go in and out and kind of accounting for those. So maybe that'd be a good topic to look at as well.
I agree. Even in the summary of Measure Q, we always, every year, summarize what was accomplished. So we could put that maybe in a different, instead of a PowerPoint, maybe it comes in a pie chart or something like that. But that's excellent. Thank you. So all of that would be under the budget transparency. It may not be this exact wording. It's just continue to develop budget documents that are more transparent than what currently is available from the city. Might be an easier way to state it. Bart, thoughts?
That's the budget transfer issue. I forget the gentleman's name who did a lot of work that I spoke with before. It's really
Homer?
Yes, I believe
Homer
so.
Alexander, thank you.
There are some 3 or 4 unique ways of having income show up which looked to be double counting. The budget transfers and the allocations I kind of get because it's difficult as to how do you show these things between the department budgets versus how does it come in, but there were 3 or 4 items that truly had unique accounting aspects to them, the way they were presented, and I could probably go back and find those. That may be what you're referring to, Craig, because that's about when you came in as well. I think it's very difficult to follow. You look at the line items, the detailed sheets, and they should be pretty straightforward. Still, they just roll up, but they're not when there's a few of these items that it's suggesting that it's an income or something, but it's really not. It's kind of a double counting that goes in there, which is maybe exactly what you were saying, if that's.
Yeah, it would just be I guess a more graphical way of showing that's easier on the eyes to read and follow. Government accounting forces us to account for things that way, and it looks like we are double accounting because you're accounting for the transfer over here in from one source and then transferring out from another source from the same fund. So it looks like you're receiving revenue over here, and it's actually revenue received in a different fund. Okay. But government accounting forces us to. Okay.
I'll go find. There are like 4 examples. I'm not talking about all of the allocations and the distributions. It's not that, because they're all over the place. But there are like 4 accounts that really it was difficult to understand why they were handled that way.
Like that's a good example of things we can dive in and hopefully paint that picture a little bit better.
Okay, so we have 2 items. What else does anybody have any thoughts on that we may want to work on next year or propose as a suggestion?
Well, on number 3, it talks about contract expenditures. So are we going, is that already there then? We're going to look at, and there's clearly the WRFCAC contracts, which are very large. And then there's the attorney fees. I'm not sure which other contracts would reach the level of wanting to look into, but certainly those 2, I think, are large enough to really understand what's happening. The issue of, we had the gap last year, which we still have, the $3 million, and then there's the document that I'm not sure about, the $650,000, if that's per year or over 3 years. But some decisions are going to have to be made, and it seems like this committee should weigh in with at least our ideas, thoughts, if not recommendations, on if you've got to cut, what are the places that we think you ought to look for. I mean, I think the community is looking to us to have an opinion on, some tough decisions on what has to be made, and they are tough decisions. Some people are not going to be happy with how we get to a balanced budget.
So I guess the comment on the easy part of that, the contracts, we've had that on our laundry list to do. We were not fully staffed. We've never gotten to it. And part of that was, as I recall, just reviewing all the different contracts, their termination dates, their amounts, making recommendations for consolidation of some of these contracts, et cetera. Wasn't a real high priority other than the WRF, the WRF, which this committee over a year ago came up with at least a format for the project to report total expenditures and revenue against, and we're still refining that. So we've done that, but secondarily, Bart, you bring up some very good points. Yes, we understand because the CalPERS that there's going to have to be a $650,000 revenue to come from somewhere or expenditure within 3 years, but that's really going to be $650,000 a year and maybe even more eventually when that pension payment becomes due. If the last city council meeting, I believe they had an extended discussion and passed a resolution, if I'm not mistaken, 4-1, to not contribute to the capital allocation funds to at least meet this year's goal towards coming up with that $650,000. So we haven't been asked to comment on that. I would anticipate at some point we would start doing some citizen outreach and maybe coming back with some recommendations. I mean, it's already, I'm not real sure what's wanted, what's needed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was actually hoping that current work plan objective C, CFAC review, I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, would include future year recommended reductions. Council said exactly like Barb was talking about, $250,000 this year from project accumulation and the capital replacement fund. So it's 150 and 200, or 150 in one and 100 in the other. But then the harder cuts come in the following year. We've got 200,000 the next year, and then on top of that 200,000, another 200,000 the following. So hopefully we can rely on all of you to have some recommendations, including outreach with the public to discuss if in the severity of the service impacts to that, because it potentially could go that route. Hopefully not, but I think that'd be a good one.
We would include that as a potential goal as to cover it really under the review of budget performance and budget recommendations.
So it'd be expanding the existing C for CFAC review?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to comment on Goal 2, Item 1, the sewer rate study, which, if that's where the tire hits the pavement, and everybody's going to get being paid on that or paying into things based on that. There was a thing called an I&I study, infiltration and inflow, which is planned for the city. But if we could do if they could do a brief study of that thing, it should be included within the scope of that water sewer rate study, not necessarily in the goals there, but within the work that they're doing for this study. It's a place where they might be able to control costs. And so at least a brief study to see if it'll have any measurable effect on sewer rates. Another thing that popped up was the Churro Creek water work that they're doing. To take advantage of that, a reservoir is going to need to be built at some point, which my understanding would be a $1 to $2 million expenditure. So if they're actually going to use that water source for anything, there are some large improvements which will be required, and I don't see that addressed anywhere, but it's more or less under the one water thing.
Okay, if I can jump in real quick, I think we're getting a little bit into other advisory boards' work groups, but that's certainly good information for like the WRF-CAC and PWAB as well. Very great information for them to dive in and take a look at. Just kind of on that note, one of the plans is to have CFAC soon review the draft rate update. So when that comes forward, that'll be something hopefully we can bring back potentially in April. I was, again, hoping to get to that a little bit later when we talk about future items, but certainly.
I was thinking something like that.
Yep.
And then goal 3, I don't see any addressing of funding for street maintenance. And considering how things have gone, maybe that ought to show up somewhere.
I think it's under number 1.
Yeah, so that's goal 3, objective 1, bring to council for decision an item to consider adding a street improvement tax measure to the November 2018 ballot. So that was actually direction given by City Council when we were thinking potentially of bringing forward a ballot measure earlier than that, and they direct us to come back no earlier than November 2018. So
yeah, well, what I'm thinking is maybe we could add something to, or research other options besides a tax type thing. Just, because we may have to think out of the box on how to justify these additional costs, which people would understand.
Certainly, and I think that's probably a good PWAB one as well. I'm sure they could dive into that a little bit more.
I agree.
Okay, so anything else?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm probably stating the obvious here, but just for clarification. When we put these work plans together, the oversight function, it seems to me, is going to carry over from one year to the next. There's some basic things. You mentioned the Measure Q review and report.
The budget.
And then the other items that are mentioned under CFAC review. So it seems to me those are going to carry over from one year to the next. Is that not correct? We're still going to need to review the quarterly budget reports, the mid-year update, the contract review was part of that. So I would think that would be the fundamental thing that we're going to be doing year after year.
Absolutely. I think some of our work plan has actually been similar the last couple of years, and it certainly has been for as long as we've been doing the Measure Q. Now we've increased our responsibilities, so that's absolutely correct. So, Craig, even though we may only have a couple items here for our work plan, some of this budget transparency, just phase 1 this year took over 6 months. So as we break up committees and start doing some things, I think we may have sufficient items right here to work on.
I would agree, and I think that Dave makes a great point. A lot of this stuff is enduring. It's an annual thing that you just that's the intent. And then I think we're talking a little more about the special stuff, the transparency stuff, kind of the special project type stuff. But yeah, completely agree.
That's fine. My point was we start with that's the basis of what we're doing. We start with that on our work plan, and all this other stuff we're talking about is on top of that.
Right. So I'm sorry if I was misleading and trying to emphasize too much of the special. Yeah, okay. All right, go ahead, Bart.
The last one, now maybe this is one that John really wants to dive into on the policies and procedures, but these items, like you said, it took 6 months to work on the one document. And you could sit here like this and say, oh, that's not a big deal, just look at that. But if you're going to really have that as a line item, that's a lot of time. And I'm not sure, to me, it doesn't rise to the level of something that we should have as a line item, personally. I mean, yes, there should be policies and procedures, but to have it be so special for us to look into, I don't personally see.
Thank you. So let me comment on that, because on the audit portion of it, I think we're okay with doing that, having a review. That was also on one of our original things, Craig, and I think the council or staff's intention at the time was that we would start reviewing the budget reference manuals. My concern with budget policies, procedures, and reference manuals is if we don't have the expertise on this committee or anybody with municipal government, accounting, and finance experience, I don't know how much we can offer. We can say, well, change everything, but if it's not in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles.
No, I would completely agree. And then especially as the Government Accounting Standards Board issues new statements. I mean, the level of complexity with even accounting for a capital asset and how you depreciate it or how you do pension funds or things like that, it takes a lot of time to Bart's point, to dive into the details and get it correct, even for things like that. So I would just be a little cognizant of kind of the workload you anticipate taking on.
Yeah, I wouldn't include that at this, unless somebody has some experience that I'm not aware of.
Is there some sort of summary about the government recommendations for accounting principles or whatever? What did you call it again?
GAP.
So there's the government accounting. There's the Government Accounting Standards Board. Mm-hmm. Which issues statements that every local jurisdiction in the entire United States should follow. If you don't follow them, then you'll have audit findings and all kinds of issues and some wonky findings, and generally you lose city managers and finance directors by going that route. And then there's generally accepted accounting principles, which Barbara was talking about, which are just kind of standard principles for how you go about accounting for certain things in government, which are vastly different from just your normal checkbook.
I'm familiar with those.
So if you go online and look up either GAAP or GASB, they'll have either a .gov or .com site for both of those, and it has kind of the listing of all the findings and the new statements on there.
Are there is there an overview type document in those things which kind of explain how they approach it, or is it all starts out in the weeds and gets deeper?
No, there's not kind of a one-page document that explains government accounting or government government standards for accounting or the principles of it. They give a brief overview of what each statement has on the GASB site. A similar thing for the GAAP site as well. But it's so complex. To boil it down into a couple sentence, Wikipedia link or hot link or something like that would be relatively impossible.
I understand. And so if I remember rightly, there was like 200 or 300 little items in GAAP, and there was something like that. So you're talking a very large document just even to summarize what the process is?
There's significantly more than 200 GAAP recommendations or policies to go forward, and then on top of that, there's government code standards, and there's procurement code standards, and it just goes on and on and on from there. So, again, it would be impossible to synthesize that into a couple-page document.
Thank you.
Okay, so So thank you. So Craig, I think we have what we need for a work plan pending additional direction from council. And that's exactly why that last one, which I felt was on the policies and knowing where this objective originally emanated from, that's exactly why I added that next to the last item on the agenda, which we'll get to in a minute, about reviewing our charter. Okay? So, Craig, do you have what you need to maybe send to me that I can share with everybody what we think our work plan would be next year?
I hope so.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that'll take us to agenda item B3. Oh, no, I'm sorry. B2, thank you. Brief update on the status of the city budget. Council went over that at their last meeting. Craig, anything you want to just go over real quickly, or I think it was pretty self-explanatory?
Yeah, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We find ourselves in a bit of a budget shortfall, which is not unusual for municipalities all over California that invest their pension funds in CalPERS. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of a domino effect of a lot of poor decisions in the past that are coming to hit us square in the face. The good news is that we had the foresight to move forward with these 10-year budget forecasts, so we can do something about it now. So next thing you know, we're not contracting out, services that are dear and near to our heart and moving forward in that direction, or cutting half our personnel, something like that. So as mentioned a bit ago, we are moving forward with compiling the budget document for City Council consideration. We should hopefully have those draft numbers back to myself and the city manager in about 2.5 weeks. Once we get that information compiled and vetted and justified and all that, we'll start to put together a budget letter, send that out to City Council so they can kind of digest that and get through the numbers. We'll have an open public budget workshop, potentially 2 of those, and then pending council direction, we'll come back and hopefully have a budget adopted, and we can all celebrate and move into it next year. That's kind of where we're at.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Again, maybe we're going over what we're supposed to do, but where is this committee supposed to feed into that process and that review? Do we have an official opinion, position on where the cuts are? Let's say we don't agree with the decision that the council made on the 4-1 vote.
I would defer to council and staff because we weren't asked, but there will be workshops. We will be asked to participate in those.
As a committee or as individuals?
As citizens.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe that's the intent of the advisory committee, was to go in and kind of hammer out all the nitty-gritty details with departments. But going forward, certainly when we look for that additional 200,000 in cuts next year and another 200,000 in future years, I'm assuming that'll be more part of the process.
Thank you. Public comment, item B2. All right, thank you. So let's move on to B3, brief history of our advisory board here in the Measure Q district transaction tax. And Craig's already, Craig, do you want to pass out some of that information? One of our citizens provide us some history, so I thought it might be good for some of the newer members to have this. But basically, as many of you know, this committee started out being called the Citizens Oversight Committee, and it was in response to the Measure Q %.5% sales tax that was passed in 2006 by the voters. And then subsequently to that, City Council adopted resolution, which you'll see here, 4612, which basically said that the revenues generated from the Measure Q sales tax were to be used for public safety, fire department, streets, storm maintenance, and storm runoff. And that was the intention. That's what the committee that was responsible for putting Measure Q on the ballot indicated to the voters would be the direction the revenues would be spent. And that resolution states that. And you can see in your packet there's some information on, what the ballot initiative wording was, what some of the flyers and door hangers were. I think the only thing important to note is that it was passed as a general sales tax, a general resolution, not a specific initiative, which required 2/3 of the voters' approval. So technically, the monies could go into the general fund, be used for anything. However, our city staff has been very diligent about only following the resolution that council adopted a couple years ago and only using the proceeds from Measure Q for the new fire station, storm drains, streets, primarily over half of it streets, police and fire, public safety, and street maintenance. So the reason it's important is that as we discuss some of the things we might work on, or we might get some additional requests from council or staff to evaluate some things next year, I think it's important that we understand if we don't do anything else, we are obligated by that ballot initiative as the oversight board to monitor the expenditure of the Measure Q funds, report. Look at that by December 31st, and then report on those expenditures by the following month or two to staff. That is the one thing that's in our charter. Everything else is somewhat optional, if you will. Okay? So let me open that up for any questions, or does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? Okay. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I wanted you to have that information because it kind of level sets everybody. Okay, so that brings us to future agenda items. And what I had as a future agenda item, whether it's the April meeting or March, would be our mission statement, our Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, our mission statement, and our charter of responsibilities. As I mentioned at our last meeting, we are not doing all those items on that. On our current charter, that was just something that was adopted we thought we could get to. We were never fully staffed. We don't have the expertise, in my opinion, to do all those things and do them well. So I think a little house cleaning is in order to adequately outline what it is we are doing and our responsibilities, assuming council and staff approve that. So that's one item I'd like to, and then people can look at that and maybe discuss that next meeting. Craig, for the April meeting, we won't have the third quarter budget reports, right?
If you really wanted them, we could make it happen. I'm not sure what benefit it would bring, honestly, looking at them every couple of months. I think that might be something to look at for next year's work plan is the frequency of these coming forward, either semi-annually and annually, which I would advocate for, like I did for, we talked about the WRFCAC stuff. But I would say no, to give you the short answer. Okay.
So maybe by then we will have met with council and have some direction on what we want to work on, and we could add that to the agenda. We also have one more opening on this board, so I think there's an announcement out, and there will be some interviews being conducted pretty soon. Dave?
Question, are we on for April 11th to have the joint meeting with City Council to go over the work plan?
Good question. I'll restate what I mentioned a few minutes ago. So there's been a little change in the game plan. So originally, the intent was to hold a joint council and advisory board meeting on the 11th to go through the work plan that we talked about a little bit earlier and have the council kind of bless or make some revisions based on their goals and objectives and kind of where they wanted to see CFAG dig their heels in a little bit. That has changed a little bit, and the draft approach now is to have the chair of each of the advisory bodies come in during that meeting as well. So it would be a city council meeting with the chair of each advisory body present, and they can kind of weigh in for the group.
But that'll still be like any regular meeting, open, and anybody can attend, correct?
Correct. Okay. If we've got more than 3 council members there, it's always open. So.
Okay.
Madam Chair, just a quick question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. When is the water sewer rate study due to be presented?
That's going to PWAB first, I understand. Doesn't come to this committee.
Right. I'm just curious.
I thought it was May.
They're just contracting for it right now. And May, they hope to start the work, and by June, they hope to have something for people to look at.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sean. Okay, anything else? Any public comment on anything? All right, closing comments from staff members. Thank you again, our new members, for participating. I recognize it's going to take a little while to get up to speed, but we look forward to working with you. Any other closing comments? Craig, do you have anything?
No, I'm just happy you have 2 new great additions to the advisory committee. Looking forward to working all of us together for a full fiscal year. So should be good.
Great, thank you, Craig.
I'm curious, Craig, on the street paving, which is really nice. There are some people who are concerned over how well it's being done. Is any of that have a potential for leading to scope changes on how much money we're going to spend? Or what is the sense of what's happening relative to the quality of the work and whatever the contract was? I don't know if it's a fixed price or not. Basically, you're going to say, here's $1 million, go do what you can do. And
so first, let's look at the quality. That's something we've heard a little bit about recently as well. So we actually put a press release out last night. Now it's on Hot Topics and under our news flash addressing that exact question. The expectation was exactly what we're seeing. Now and then there is some cracking going on out there. There has been some little issues with where kind of some of the splashing and things like that have come out, and we're going out and having city crews inspect for things like that. So there is going to be some rocks that get kicked up. That's an expected process as we go forward with this. So in those streets that are going to receive multiple treatments, a good number of them haven't received their second treatment, which would actually seal it over and make sure that stuff doesn't happen and help kind of smooth out and kind of patch that stuff a little bit. The second part of your question was, do we expect to expend more money? I think that's what you're asking, expend more money because of default in a contractor's responsibility or something like that? No, we don't expect to.
The only source of extra money would be if there was a discovered condition which required extra work in order to make it safe.
Okay, thank you. I think there was something in the newspaper too this weekend. And you're using Nextdoor. I think I saw some announcements, so thank you. I think that's a good way to get the message out.
Correct, thank you. We are using Nextdoor, which is a social media site based on your neighborhood, and you can kind of share things, as well as Facebook postings. So, yep.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you all. Meeting adjourned.